In our last video, we introduced the method of truth trees. And now we're going to delve a little deeper into the rules for breaking up the sentences in our tree. But first, let's do a short recap. Remember that a truth tree is a device for displaying the truth value assignments on which all of the sentences in a given set come out true. A complete truth tree contains a series of paths, which can be open or closed. A closed path is one that contains at least one instance of X and not X, and a path is open if and only if it is not closed. If a tree for a set S contains at least one open path, then the set S is consistent. Otherwise, the set is inconsistent. Okay, now the truth tree method directly tests for consistency or inconsistency of sets of sentences. But we'll see later that indirectly it can be used to test all the other properties that we have studied, namely validity, logical truth, etc. But for now, let's keep on focusing on consistency. So in order to test for consistency, we know that we take each sentence from the initial list and then we break it down into those sentences that, according to the rules, must be true in order for the original sentence to be true. So these sentences will in their turn be broken down until we have nothing but atomic sentences or negations of atomic sentences. And these are called literals. Or at least they're frequently called literals. And a literal is either an atomic sentence or the direct negation of an atomic sentence. So B, C, not D, not E is a literal, but B ampersand E, for instance, is not a literal. Okay, let's go back for a second. Remember that the truth tree method involves breaking down sentences according to rules. And we got a glimpse of those rules on our last lesson. But let's be more explicit now about those rules. There's actually two rules for each of our connectives, but those rules are pretty transparent from the evaluation rules of the connectives in question. So you won't have any trouble understanding them. Okay, let's begin with the conjunction X ampersand Y. So what has to happen for X and Y to be true? Well, if we look at the truth table, there is only one case that guarantees that the conjunction is going to be true, and that is when both conjuncts are true. So there is only one story that is going to make this sentence true, just one path. In other words, so we check it and we open a stack, and X is true and Y is true in that stack. But what happens when X and Y is negated? Well, again, not X and Y is going to be true if and only if this conjunction X and Y is going to be false. And what guarantees that X and Y is going to be false? Well, this could be false in either of two ways, corresponding to the negation of one of the conjuncts, right? So if the less conjunct is false, then the conjunction is going to be false. If the right conjunct is going to be false, then the whole conjunction is going to be false. And we know that X is going to be false when not X is true, and the same for Y. So we check it, and then we branch into not X and not Y. And in consonants, we see that this is equivalent to not X or not Y, so we treat it as a disjunction of not X and not Y. Now, the disjunction, the simple disjunction. Well, how do we develop this? Well, if you remember the evaluation rule, a disjunction is going to be true if at least one of the disjuncts is true. So there are at least two ways of guaranteeing that this sentence is going to be true, namely if X is true or if Y is going to be true. So these are two alternative paths. So this is a branching rule. We check it and we open two branches. And what about the negation of a disjunction? Well, again, there is only one case that guarantees that the negation of a disjunction is true. And that is when both of the disjuncts are false. And remember that we can make them false by making their negations true. So there is only one case, only one story, only one path. So we check and then we stack the negations of each of the disjuncts. We have not X, not Y. And we treat it, as a matter of fact, like a conjunction, the conjunction of not X and not Y. So it is a stacking rule. Okay, let's go to the conditional. Well, if you remember, the conditional is equivalent to not X or Y. So we treat it as a disjunction, the disjunction of not x and y, and so we branch. And the left branch is going to be not x, right branch is going to be y. And not if x, then y. Again, there is only one case in which the conditional is false, and that is when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. So we treat it as equivalent to x and not y. And it is a conjunction, in other words. So it is a stacking rule. For this sentence to be true, x must be true and not y is going to be true. Now let's go to the biconditional. Are we going to have a branching rule or are we going to have a stacking rule? Well, let's look at the truth table. So if you see, there are two ways, and exactly two ways of making this biconditional true, which is that when both components are true, and the other one is when both components are false. In other words, when they have the same truth value. And we can't express this in a shorter way than by saying that x, if and only if y, is true if either x is true and y is true, or alternatively, if not x is true and not y is true. And so we treat it as equivalent to a disjunction of conjunctions, right? X and y, or not x and not y. So in a way, it's both, as it involves both stacking and branching. So it is a branching of stacks, if you will. And the negation of a conjunction, well, is exactly the other two cases in the truth table. X and not y on the one hand, and on the other one, not x and y. Okay, let's put these rules to use. Determine whether this set of sentences is consistent. Okay, we put all of the sentences at the root of the tree, and remember that this is a tree that grows downwards. So the first thing that we have to bear in mind is that it's better if we begin with stacking rules. So first of all, we have three sentences. One of them is a literal, namely not be, so we need not worry about it. And the other two, one is a disjunction, and remember that disjunctions involve branching. The other one is the negation of a disjunction. And remember that the negation of a disjunction is treated as a conjunction, is thus a stacking event. And so we're going to start with not A or C. And, well, if you remember, the relevant rule is that not X or Y, we check it, and then we list the negation of each of the disjuncts. So we check it, and we stack not A, not C. Okay, now we're going to deal with the first disjunction. So the relevant rule is this branching rule that you have here to your right. So we check it, and we open two branches. The left one has A, the right one has B and C. So are we done breaking up sentences? Not really. We still have B and C at the bottom of the tree. So we check it, we break it down, and we end up with B and C. So there are no more sentences to break down here. We have only literals and checked non-literals. So the question is, are there any open paths? Well, let's check them one by one. Let's begin with the left one. Well, the first thing that we encounter is that we have A and not A, so we close it. We give it an X. What about the other one? What about the right one? Well, not only do we have not B and B, but we also have not C and C, so this is super duper closed. Well, all paths are closed, and we conclude that the set that we started with is inconsistent. Okay, let's do another example. Determine whether the following set is consistent. So we begin our initial list, and where should we start? Well, notice that we have a conditional at the top, but that involves a branching rule. Then we have a disjunction, which involves also a branching rule. Then we have a conjunction, and the conjunction involves a stacking rule. That's where we start. So we check it, and then we have the stack of not C and not A. So we can continue with either of the other two sentences. Both are branching. I'm going to start with the conditional because it is at the top, just for that reason. So this is where we start, and remember that the relevant rule is this: to the right, we branch with the negation of the antecedent to the left and the consequent to the right. So we have the left branch is going to be not A, and the right branch is going to be B. Now, the only one that we have left is C or not B. Now, remember that when we have more than one branch open, then when we break down and develop a sentence, we have to do it on each of the open branches. So we're going to check C or B, and we're going to branch out both in the left path and in the right path, right? So on the left path, we have C, and then not B, and then we have C, and we have not B. So are there any open paths? Well, let's begin with the left. And, well, we have not C and C, so it is closed. Let's go to the next one. Well, here I cannot see any instance of X and not X, so this path is open. So there is at least one assignment that makes all the sentences true. So the set is consistent. Now, I could ask you this question. Mention one assignment that makes all the sentences in the set true. And well, we already know how to derive assignments from open paths. So we start with our open path, and we remember the rule that says that if a letter shows up negated, then the assignment sets off that letter to F. So all the letters in our path are negated. So the assignment simply sets each of the letters to F. It makes them all false. Okay, now we can check, so we can verify that this assignment actually makes all the sentences in the set true. So let's begin with the topmost one, A then B. Well, this assignment sets both A and B to F. And we know that if the antecedent of the conditional is false, then automatically the sentence is true. So if A then B is made true by this assignment. Now let's go to the next one, C or not B. Since B is false, then not B is true. Therefore, the right disjunct is true. At least one of the disjuncts is true. Automatically, the disjunction is true. Finally, not C and not A. Well, not C is true because C is false. And since A is false, not A is true. Therefore, both of the conjuncts are true. So not C and not A is also true. All of the sentences in the set are true. Okay, so this sentence is actually consistent. Well, this is all for today. Bye.